Welcome to One Man's Tracks, the second-hand music channel. This week, I learned about a Dallas, Texas-based teenage trio that, in the 90s, record companies had pegged as kind of the American response to Silverchair, the next big young band that was up and coming. Originally made up of frontman Ben Kweller, drummer John David Kent, and bassist Ryan Green, they'd call themselves Radish. Forming in 1993, back when Ben was only 12 years old, they'd play shows at local venues and record a pair of independent albums, Hello in 1994 and Dizzy in 1995. These early, sort of messier garage punk pop mixes are some albums that are hard to come across now, as they were mostly just sold at shows, but one of them got sent to Niles Lofgren, a mentor figure of Ben's, who showed it to his producer, who would ship it to a ton of record companies, generating an unexpected buzz for Radish and getting them signed with Danny Goldberg at Mercury Records in 1996. Along with their new bassist Brian Blur replacing Green, who'd left shortly after recording Dizzy to pursue his schoolwork, as well as help from producer Roger Greenawalt, they'd stripped down their sound to this cleaner pop rock with a heavy post-grunge tilt. Essentially an attempt at marketing Ben as a new teenage Cobain on this. Their major label debut, produced by Roger Greenawalt, as well as production duo Sean Slade and Paul Q. Colberly, released in April of 1997. Here's Radish's Restraining Bolt. Released when Ben Kweller was just 15 years old with a pair of top 50 hits in the UK, it manages to showcase both his youthful impulsions as well as some surprisingly mature songwriting. It's a light listen if you're a real grunge listener, but a bit dark for a pop audience. Honestly, it's probably the best example I've found so far, and maybe the more enjoyable side of the 90s most industrially manufactured genre, post-grunge. A fairly clinical LP with some strong whiffs of grunge riffs that are just kind of clean up to the point that they're feeling like it's trying to reach for just a little bit too much popular appeal. I'm not overly enamored by it, but I still enjoy it quite a bit, and certainly much more than most of the other albums I've tried that are trying to sit in a similar lane. You can check out my post-grunge party booper video for a couple of examples of bands that I'm not quite as fond of. While this may have a few instances where it's hard to unsee the influences and some unimaginative lyricism here and there, I can see that these are clearly some competent musicians. There's a lot of potential here, and the overall product is impressive. Restraining Bolt finds its appeal as a fun to dance to, easy to listen to, angsty grunge pop record that you can sing along with. It loses it in trying to appeal to too broad of an audience without grittiness or any boldness. It tries to appear mature and clean and loses out on any rawness or rowdiness that maybe would have let it branch out a little further into different audiences and given it probably a better longevity. Maybe I'm not quite as excited about Radish as I am usually about these new bands, but I still think these guys have some great songs, some good performances, as well as a compelling enough story that had me interested enough to dive a little deeper. And so I'm curious, what are your memories of Radish? Have you ever seen them live? Do you have a copy of one of those rare tapes? Leave me a comment, and while you do, I'm going to be taking some time and going over some of those great tracks here. Starting with the lead single and Radish's biggest hit, it's Little Pink Stars. This is one of those songs that's tough to get out of your head. I'm not crazy about the poppier tempo shift for the hook, but the verses, chorus, and guitar solo more than make up for it. It's a really solid pop rocker that's maybe trying one too many things. I want the world to know that you're mine. I want to touch you, Yeah, yeah! On to the second single and second hit, Simple Sincerity, has this familiar guitar riff that it might have originally been this AC/DC, some kind of 80s hard rock riff, but it was morphed into this track, and then a couple years later for Third Eye's Blue album, it was used once again to even more better effect that had the track Never Let You Go just everywhere. It kind of undermines this pretty great song that is this simple and sincere track about the frustrations of having everything taken away from you, and it leads really well into the indecisive follow-up, Failing and Leaving. It kind of rocks you along to that familiar teenage catch-22 of should I stay or should I go. Now on to my favorite track of the bunch. It's the darker and emotive Dear Antarctica. It is probably the grittiest these guys are allowed to get, with Ben singing about his hatred for the Montana Freemen, the KKK that burnt down some churches in his hometown. It's not exactly the hottest take, but I just love his passion, and the simple repeated chorus just imprints itself on my brain. Sugar Free is another catchy, grunge-tinted emo rocker about Ben's need to withdraw himself from unfulfilling relationships and not kind of worry about the people's reaction to his withdrawal. And then things take a bit of a darker turn with a song about robbing a store and falling in love with a whore called Today's Bargain. It has so much potential to be a super radical cut, but the conviction behind it just isn't quite enough to carry a sort of one-dimensional song, making it less radical and more rad-ish. I'll just let myself out. I'm sorry, guys. Crossing the midpoint and taking a bit of a 180 on the song The You in Me, more about being a nerd and liking D&D and how sitting at home reading Oscar Wilde isn't going to pay the bills. It's low-key, straightforward, and it uses slacker rock to pretty good effect, but that kind of in turn leads this to being one of the less memorable songs so far. This album's longest, clocking in at just under 5.5 minutes, is the more adult Still I Wait. Some really interesting lyricism that seems to boil down to waiting on change to come. It borders on stadium rock with its head moving, fist in the air chorus and steady tempo. It seems to hit on a similar theme to that of Failing and Leaving, just this time with more certainty behind it. It is, again, a solid cut, but it's not one that I'm going to sit with for too long, feeling like more of a transitionary point in the album, taking a turn in energy and shifting towards more maturity in the back end here. Going through A Promise and Apparition of Purity, you start to forget that this is a 15-year-old singer-songwriter with their surprising depth and Kweller's really convincing vocal range. These are objectively really well put together, well produced songs, but unfortunately I don't seem to connect with these as much as I do maybe the more adolescent ones. Thankfully, my guitar wins me right back with a simple, heartfelt, honest ode to that wonderful instrument that brings so many great sounds to my ears. It's beachy, light and breezy, and sends us to the end of the album with a great big smile. Here's the true teenage reminder. They close out this album with a song called Bedtime. It's about nuclear war, I think, but it is essentially their heart-shaped box turned post-grunge. There's some intimate moments you might call grungy, but it's far cleaner and way less in-your-face than anything you'd actually call grunge. It's still a great song. I think it's awesome, but it does end up just leaving me wanting to listen to some real grunge after this CD's 49 minutes are up. It's apparent these guys weren't going to be the next Nirvana, and that they weren't even really allowed to be. This is a really fun record, but it takes itself a little bit too seriously and is far too cleaned up. There's the youthful spirit that maintains a little bit of integrity here, and it makes me wish there was a little bit more of this self-proclaimed sugar metal beyond this first label-backed release. It sure sounds like the ambitious double album follow-up Discount Fireworks they put together with their new lineup was gonna be that album that I was looking for, but Unfortunately, due in part to Polygram's acquisition and merger with UMG, their new owners didn't see a hit on that new album and just shelved it and shelved the future of the band along with it. Radish was released from their contract in 1998. They'd play some local shows until Ben left Texas to go be with his girlfriend, now wife. They'd eventually settle in New York, where he'd sign with ATO Records to release some solo albums. I do believe John played on the first couple of those, the first one being Sha Sha, an album that apparently contains some songs that were supposed to be on Discount Fireworks, so I guess we get a little bit there, and I think the fun little Weezer-isms, the more indie rock flavor that provides is a solid album as well. That's worth checking out if you enjoyed this. He's released 6 albums under the name Ben Kweller, along with numerous other collaborations since Radish. He's gone independent with his own label, The Noise Company, since his Go Fly a Kite release in 2012, and most recently he came out with Circuit Boredom in 2022, just a couple of months back, so maybe check that one out too if you haven't gotten back into him. I think that album is one of his best. John David Kent has released a couple of albums under that name. They're a bit too country for my taste, but if that's your style, I've linked them down below, as well as everything else I've talked about musically today. What are your thoughts on Restraining, both John or Ben's solo work beyond Radish? I'd love to hear a comment down below. Like the video. If you're looking for a couple of more albums, check these 2 reviews or the dozens of others I've done on the channel. Subscribe for weekly throwback, retrospective, secondhand madness, baby. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Dear Antarctica.